On this week's Fanco Wrestling Show, you'll get a deep dive into the most stacked weight classes of the 2021 season. But the question remains, which is the toughest? Let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to the Fanco Wrestling Show right here on YouTube, or you may be listening on Apple Podcasts. If you are listening on either, I ask that you maybe consider clicking that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on the latest going on in the world of wrestling, where we talk all about wrestling topics. And on this show, it's the big show of the year where we talk everything going on with weight classes, which is the toughest weight class of the 2021 season. We're not just going to be talking about the toughest, but a few of the other contenders. Now, yes, I will give you an actual answer as to which weight class I think is the actual toughest based on statistics, of course. So, at the beginning of the show, before we get into a couple of these main topics, I want to talk about the variance in toughest, just right off the top here. So first of all, what does it mean to be the toughest weight class? This could be based on the most difficult to win the weight. This could be the most stacked weight of the year, as far as like how many just tough, all-around, hard-nosed wrestlers there are in a weight. Or it just could be the most open weight. And I'm going based kind of off the most tough competition at a weight class, at a particular weight class. And yes, I will be going into all of that. So let's talk about this. So a couple quick fire topics right off the bat. Over the weekend, maybe you missed it. Dayton Fix returned to the mat, which was awesome to see. Penn State and Michigan faced off in an exciting dual meet, which I found was a lot of fun. I was jumping all around, and Stephen Buchanan actually beat Noah Adams again on the season 2 weeks in a row, and that's going to be important as we get into one of these weight classes later on in the show. If you missed any of the wrestling headlines, you can check those out over on the Fanco Wrestling YouTube channel, where I talk all about the latest in wrestling headlines after every weekend. Now, California Baptist is actually heading to the Big 12. So Cal Baptist is a newer D1 program, and they're actually unable to compete in the national tournament this year, and actually I think until maybe 2022, but they will be heading to the Big 12. That's kind of big wrestling news this week. We were unsure about which conference they were going to go into, but they decided, and kind of with the Big 12 worked it out, that they're going into the Big 12. Now, unfortunately, Fresno State is leaving the Big 12 because they're dropping their program. So that's a big shame to see. In other news, Davidson has pulled out of the NCAA tournament. The first team to pull out of the NCAA tournament. This is very, very unfortunate news coming out of Davidson. A Tier 1 personnel tested positive. So that's probably somebody on their training staff, coaching staff, something like that on Tier 1 personnel. And their coach said, it's certainly disappointing that we will not be able to compete at the Southern Conference Championships. But we walk away from the past season with our heads high, grateful for every opportunity to compete, and proud of the 3 SoCon dual meet victories our team achieved. This is unfortunate for the team. I feel my heart goes out to them. It's so unfortunate to hear that these guys aren't able to compete and go after their goals in this postseason due to the virus and due to how it's affecting their team. It's such a shame. I hope that we don't see other schools follow suit. But that's the end of the negativity, because now we get into some very positive topics in each weight class. And the first big topic of the day, talking about weight classes, is we're going to be talking about the 3 top-heavy weight classes this season. So what do I mean by top-heavy weight classes? Well, that pretty much just means, whenever I say top-heavy, is that there's a clear difference between the top guys, the number 1, number 2, number 3 ranked guys, and then the next tier. So, in my opinion, these may be the toughest to win. And depending on how you look at this, maybe you say these are the toughest weight classes. And I get why you say that. I'm not saying that they're the toughest weight classes, but certainly they're some of the toughest to win. And the first of that is 125 pounds. At 125 pounds, and before I actually get into this, I want to tell you that this segment is brought to you by channel supporter Daryl Talley, who just recently became a channel supporter right here on the Fanco Wrestling YouTube channel. He's helping to fund and support the channel as a channel support. He also gets to use the exclusive Fanco Wrestling emojis during the live chats of the Fanco Wrestling Show every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. It's awesome that Daryl's able to support the show. Just subscribed and actually helped the channel last week. So at 125, arguably I think this is the most top-heavy because, yeah, you have the number one guy, Spencer Lee, and not just the number one at the weight, but the number one pound for pound in the entire country. So, Spencer Lee, number one pound for pound in the entire country. I mean, it's just been so fun to watch him wrestle this year, right? I mean, winning every match by fall so far, the multiple-time NCAA champ and Hodge Trophy winner, it has made 125 pounds. He's made everybody else kind of flee away from him. Now, it's become a race for second, and there are still some guys who haven't wrestled Spencer Lee this year. One guy, Sam Latona, the redshirt freshman, has backed. He's kind of that begins that next tier. And at 125, the next tier, I guess, would be the number 2 through 5, 6, 7. After that, you can make some arguments, but it's just crazy that Spencer Lee has really pushed ahead this much. So Latona has back-to-back wins over Camachos, Jacob Camacho and Colton Camacho of Pitt. His big win over NC State's Jacob Camacho, that was a crazy victory for Virginia Tech's Sam Latona. Those guys are number 2 and number 3, and the ACC is a lot of fun here. And other news in the weight, Brandon Courtney is undefeated of Arizona State. Drew Hildebrand of Central Michigan, also undefeated currently on the season. His best win over Connor Brown of Mizzou. And Brody Teske is another name that I think is worth mentioning at this weight at 125 pounds. With his wins over Master Giovanni, Alex Mackel. I mean, Brody Teske has had some, he's 8-1 this year, has had some solid victories in his career, and with the recent transfer, this is his first real season he's able to compete. But that's why 125 is the most top heavy, because I don't know if any of these guys are going to be able to compete against Spencer Lee, who's just pinning top 5 ranked guys. At 157, I think that's the next top heavy weight, and it's really the top 3 guys. And you could make an argument after that 4 and 5 are definitely could compete at those top spots. But in the past year, we've seen that 157 has kind of been a runaway with these 3 guys, with Ryan Deacon, Hayden Hidley, and David Carr. So Deacon is the number 1 here, 2-0 on the year. He made his return last weekend at Wisconsin. It was cool to see him back on the mat, Deacon of Northwestern. He has wins over Hayden Hidley and David Carr. He has wins over those guys last season, not this season. He beat them both the same weekend at the Cliff Keen Las Vegas tournament. Now, he did actually wrestle each of these guys in the offseason. This is what's the interesting triangle here, and why 157 is very top-heavy with these 3 guys. And there's still some talent after that. With Jesse De La Vecchia of Ryder, who's undefeated. Caleb Young, who had a great win over Brayton Lee this season so far. And actually does have a win, 2 sudden victory wins over Ryan Deacon, but those are a couple years ago. We're not sure how he would compete this year. I would think that he's still going to be solid, but the top 3, Deacon, as I mentioned, wrestled Hidley and Carr in the offseason. So how did those turn out? They wrestled at the Senior Nationals tournament back in, I believe it was October was when that was, and Hidley actually has a win over Deacon at the Senior Nationals. And Deacon had to win over Carr, and actually Carr ended up beating Deacon. So it was kind of a back and forth at the Senior Nationals there. So it's interesting because each of these guys is undefeated this year. David Carr has the best record, 12-0, but Hidley's 7-0. Each of these guys is going to make 157 fun to watch in the postseason, especially because each of these guys are in separate conferences, and they're going to get the 1, 2, 3 seeds likely if they each win their conferences. Big 10, ACC, Big 12. Should be fun to see what happens there in the postseason. And then the last top-heavy weight class that I think there is this season is heavyweight. At 285 pounds is Gable Steveson, who has just been... He's been crushing it as much as Spencer Lee's been crushing it. And the fact that Gable has 25 straight wins. His last loss was actually in the NCAA semifinals against Anthony Cassar of Penn State, who is the only guy still to beat Gable Steveson in his collegiate career. And the weight class is top heavy, mostly with Gable Steveson. Now, Mason Parris, you can make an argument that he is in that same tier as Gable, and I would understand you saying that because he is, but Stevenson does have that win over Mason Parris in the past. Last year, Big Tens beat him 8-6. Parris was actually close. I believe it had him on his back at one point, or at least was close to getting him on his back. He has 2 wins over Anthony Cassiope, who's the number 3 guy, and a major over him this season. So Stevenson has 100% bonus point percentage, and I think that's what puts him in that top tier. And he's, people are asking the question, is who's going to win the Hod this year? Is it going to be Gable? Is it going to be Spencer Lee? Because each of these guys are just killing it this year. It's been so exciting to watch him. I mean, even beating Luffman and like I said, Cassiope, who are top-ranked guys, they have proven themselves, have put themselves ahead of everybody else. Now, I'm interested to see like a Matt Stencil, how he's going to compete at this weight, or a Colton Schultz, who's undefeated right now, the young guy who does have a win over Gannon Grumwell and Carter Isley. It'll be interesting to see how he does against some of these other guys at heavyweight. But 125, 157, and 285, I believe, are the most top-heavy and maybe most difficult to win weight classes this season. Does that make them the toughest? No, I'll get to that in just a second. But the first thing that I have to talk about is actually 197 pounds. So at 197 pounds, there's a lot going on here. So anybody could win 197 pounds this year. I've said that last year, and I think it reigns even more true this year with the amount of upsets that have been going on. Because last year, I had kind of said that, and there were some interesting upsets between the number 3, number 8 ranked guys. But, Noah Adams was kind of that clear number 1. But this year, he's been upset. So I think 197 is the most open weight class to win this season. There are a large amount of undefeated wrestlers still, with Miles Amin, with Eric Schultz, Cordell Norfleet, Greg Bolzak, Tanner Sloan, Rocky Elam, and Chris Cobra. Each of these guys still undefeated on the season heading into the postseason. And anything could happen with these top 20. I wouldn't say that about every single weight because I don't necessarily believe that. But at 197, it's something that I do believe. So I'm going to go through each of these conferences and there are 3 main conferences I think are super important to note, but I'm going to give you a little bit of something on each of these. So what's going on in each of these weight classes as I break down some of these crazy triangles that have been going down, because there's just a lot here, in the Big Ten. There's so much going on with Miles Amin first. Let's talk about Big Ten. Miles Amin of Michigan making his comeback, bumping up a weight from 84 to 97. Eric Schultz, who you may argue should be the number 1 ranked wrestler right now at 97. And I would actually probably argue in your favor, even though Miles Amin is the 3-time All-American bumping up. But Eric Schultz has been just a thrill to watch this year. Undefeated with wins over other Big Ten guys, Caffey, Warner, Davison, excuse me. And he's been putting up points like crazy. He had a 20-plus point match the other week. Eric Schultz is crushing it this season, and Amin at the top I think is going to be interesting because Amin has had some close matches. He's back on the saddle, he's back on the mats, but he's had some close matches already, like his match against Michael Beard, which he had won it, but I mean Michael Beard was looking pretty tough. Gavin Hoffman, he actually won both of those matches to start out the year, 8-5, and he hasn't really wrestled any of the other guys who have bumped up, actually, from 184, which is kind of funny. Miles Amin bumping up from 84 actually hasn't even wrestled a Bono Corsi or Cam Caffey, who each of these guys have bumped up from 84 as well, but hasn't wrestled them yet. So that's the interesting things going on there with the Big Ten. Now, what else is going on at 197 pounds? And, of course, you do also have Jacob Warner of Iowa, who has 2 wins over Schultz in the past, all within 2 to 3 points, which is interesting. Lucas Davison of Northwestern, Cam Caffey, Michael Beard. I mean, each of these guys are going to make for a fun Big Ten championships. In the Big 12s, the biggest stories here in there's still one conference that I think has the biggest stories within the ACC. But first, the Big 12. Steve Buchanan of Wyoming, the sophomore, 8-2 this year. Back-to-back wins over Noah Adams. Actually, he did have a loss to Cordell Norfleet in between that time by pin, but he had 2 wins over Noah Adams, which originally there were some people saying that Buchanan, maybe it's just a little fluke, maybe whatever. It wasn't convincing enough. I mean, I said from the beginning that this was a convincing enough victory for him to say that, yeah, he convincingly beat the number 1 Noah Adams, who had one of the longest running winning streaks in the NCAA up to that point last week. But now Buchanan has beat him twice. Noah Adams, of course, here, 10-2 on the season. 2 losses coming to Buchanan. Tanner Sloan of South Dakota State, the sophomore, 13-0, and has been on a lot of people's radars. He's number 12 in the country right now. And is riding a nice winning streak, but he hasn't wrestled any of those top guys. That's kind of why he hasn't cracked into that top echelon yet. AJ Ferrari, the freshman phenom, is another interesting story who has been just wrecking his way through the year. Has a loss to Noah Adams, but if your only loss is to the guy who was the previous number 1, that's not too bad of a resume for that season. How he's going to do in the postseason is going to be interesting, and Jake Woodley is another interesting guy to note here. But my absolute favorite conference at 197 this year, and you may have already guessed it, but it's the ACC. I mean, there's another big triangle. You know, I already mentioned some of the triangles going on here beforehand, but the biggest triangle is Isaac Trumbull, who beat Nino Bonacorsi, who was a top 10 guy. Trumbull, not yet, a freshman of NC State, beat Bonacorsi of Pitt. Bonacorsi then rattled back that next week to beat Giaiello of Virginia, even though Virginia upset Pitt in the dual meet. And then Aiello has a win over Caden Russell of Duke. And you may say, okay, well, what's the big deal there? Well, Russell pinned Trumbull. The triangle is just a complete mess, and maybe it's more than a triangle because it's more than 3 guys within this. But anyways, there are no All-Americans here between these guys, but multiple qualifiers who just haven't had a chance to prove themselves yet within the national tournament. Now, Bonacorsi should be interesting to watch. 7-1 on the year. He's the junior and has wrestled in the national tournament, but again, like I said, just hasn't proven himself yet. And then Isaac Trumbull, on the other hand, is just a freshman and just literally has not got a shot at a postseason yet. This would be his first postseason he's able to wrestle, and that's why I think it's going to be super interesting to watch them wrestle, you know, in the ACC, watch some of these teams. And then we have to talk about the rest of 197 and why this weight class is so open. So, you know, I mentioned Miles Amin, you know, he's the number 1, but could be upset. Anything could happen there, especially with Schultz and Amin. And there's nobody, I think, that is a clear number 1 here. You know, Buchanan with a win over Noah Adams, that positions him to be a top-ranked wrestler. Sloan, undefeated. The Bonacorsi, Giaiello, Trumbull triangle, and then the rest of these guys, a few undefeated guys in each of these weights, in each of these conferences. Cordell Norfleet of Arizona State is one to note. People have been saying he's been primed for a breakout ever since last year, primed for a breakout. In the MAC, Rocky Elam of Mizzou and Greg Boldzak are both undefeated wrestlers and could face off in the MAC finals. And Boldzak was actually my dark horse pick last year to win a title at 97. He's currently ranked number 11 in the country. I'm looking out for him to be on the podium this year. In EIWA, there's a Jake Jacobson, JT Brown, Jacob Kozer, another triangle kind of happening there with those guys. With Jacobson beating Brown, Brown beating Kozer, Kozer beating Jacobson. I mean, it's just another triangle. And then Chris Kober and the SoCon, who is undefeated still. 197 is, in my opinion, the most open weight class this year. Who do you think may win the title at the national tournament? And let's get into the big one of the night. And the big question of the night is, what is the toughest weight class of the year? What is the toughest weight class of 2021? I'm here to give you the definitive answer. 165 pounds is the toughest weight class of the season. Now, you may say 125 is the toughest. Spencer Lee, nobody's getting above him. 133 is the toughest. It's nuts right now with Dayton Fix, with RBY. Like, anything could happen there. You may say it's heavyweight with Gable Steveson. Okay, I'm taking this from the perspective that anybody could win it, but the amount of talent there makes this weight class so darn tough. So what does make this weight class so tough? And one of those is the talent, but the other thing is past history. So this weight class in particular has a past history, which I think makes it even more exciting, is it's so tough to win and win multiple times. You know, Vincenzo Joseph, looking back a couple years ago, first had the big pin as a freshman over Isaiah Martinez in the finals over Imar, crazy. And then just a couple years later, Mikhail Lewis had the big upset win as a freshman over Vincenzo Joseph, who's going for his third title. Now, granted, during this time, you know, Vincenzo was a number 3 seed, who actually beat Mass in the semis, which I think is kind of funny to look back on that. Mikhail was the number 8 seed, so each of these guys were positioned to actually do well and have a run. When we look at guys this year, like, you know, a Cam Amin, who's a freshman, or Joe Lee, who's a freshman, it's going to be a little bit tougher for them, who right now are sitting at number 14, number 15 in the country, and would likely have a number 2 or number 3 seed right in the second round. So that'd be a little bit tougher for them. But the past history, I think, is what makes it exciting and makes it fun, because what if a freshman does win this again? It really just shows the pedigree of 165 and the excitement there. The returning talent also makes it fun. Mikhail Lewis, the returning national champ, who was unfortunately injured by Jake Wenzel in the pit in Virginia Tech duel just recently. And I hope that Mikhail does get better, but that will make it fun if he does get back onto the mat. Alex Marinelli, a multiple-time All-American. Shane Griffith, who's been riding a 33-match win streak, hasn't really had his chance at the national tournament yet, and I hope he does this year. Even other guys who are returning talent with Anthony Valencia, Ethan Smith, and others who are round of 16 or blood round guys. The third reason is there's a lot of new talent. You know, I mentioned the freshman thing happening with Mikhail and with Vincenzo, but with the new talent, with Griffith, Whitlake, Bronigal, Will Formato, Peyton Robb, and you may be saying, well, all those guys aren't freshmen. No, they're not. But they haven't got a chance to wrestle in the NCAA championships yet because it was taken from them last year. So that's part of it. But then, you know, you do have the freshmen who have been pulling upsets this year, and I think that's another big reason, is with Andrew Sparks beating Peyton Robb first match of the season. Cam Amin recently beating Joe Lee. And yeah, it was a freshman over another freshman, but still impressive. And then before I get into why this is such a battle this year at 165, like all the craziness that has been happening at 165, I want to talk about the wide array of tough wrestlers across all the conferences. Because there have been quite a few there are so many tough wrestlers across every single conference. I mean, look at these rankings here with Mikhail Lewis sitting at the top, which I'll be honest with you, let's get into that for a second. Should Mikhail still be at the top even though he lost to Jake Wenzel? No, I don't believe so. He lost, and that was a legitimate loss. Yes, it was an injury default where Jacob Wenzel took the win over Mikhail. Now, he was beating him before that 3-0, and the rankings that I use are actually Flow Wrestling's rankings, who have Mikhail sitting at number 1 still because they're like, oh, anything could have happened after that. Yeah, okay, but Jake Wenzel got the win, and he was up ahead in that match. It's not like we were 30 seconds in, nothing happened. Okay, then I would understand. But anyways, that's my side for that. In the ACC, Mikhail and Wenzel should be an interesting story. Big Ten, Alex Marinelli and Ethan Smith. Pac-12, Shane Griffith, Anthony Valencia. Bump it down. Big 12, Travis Whitlake. And the SoCon, Will Formato. I mean, there's just a wide array of talent throughout the entire NCAA, and I think that's what makes it so darn difficult, is because there's so much that can happen in the ACC in particular, which is why this battle is like, why is this battle still bubbling? Like, why is just the beginning of the battle. In the ACC, it's going to be a bloodbath, first of all. Just in the ACC, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath. Wenzel, with that recent win over Mikhail, Wenzel's actually the returning ACC champ. Mikhail is the returning NCAA champ. Super fun to note. But the other things going on in the ACC are just as exciting. Jake Keating of Virginia has a recent win over Kennedy Monday. And Monday is somebody who has been on my watch list. I'll say that. He has been on my watch list since last year with his tech fall over David McFadden, as well as just wins earlier on in the season. But, you want to talk about that. Like, that was crazy. Monday beat Thomas Bullard earlier on the season, and then he had a close loss to Mikhail Lewis, who pulled a comeback kind of at the end of the match there. So with all these guys, the ACC is just stacked here at 65, and that's just the ACC. Speaking of Mikhail Lewis, Marinelli's been hungry for some Mikhail Lewis. Ever since his loss to him in the NCAA quarterfinals by a close takedown, he's been wanting that match. Marinelli, unfortunately, has been somebody that's kind of underperformed at NCAAs, but I don't see that from him this year. He is determined. He's hungrier than ever. Unfortunately, he's been struggling with the virus a little bit, within the program. But returning as a Big Ten champ, he is the guy to watch this year, in as well as some of these other guys. But Marinelli is, one of these guys to watch, as he hasn't done it before, and this is his shot to do it. Shane Griffith, speaking of guys who have a reason to win, oh my gosh, Shane Griffith, my goodness. He has more of a reason to win than anybody, really. I mean, Stanford shutting down their program at the end of the season, so unfortunate to see that. He's really a hot commodity. I mean, imagine if he wins it this year, going back to his program and saying, and just the coaches being able to say, you're going to shut down our program when we raise $12 million, which is another thing, like, not really in relation to this, but they raised $12 million. That's crazy, to help bring back the program. And we have an NCAA champion if Shane Griffith was to win the title this year. I mean, that's just crazy. And just in the last season, he had wins over Whitlake, Schedule, Smith, Monday. He has that pedigree of wins, and he's riding a nice winning streak. And then I think the other thing about 165 and why the battle is just beginning, it's the beginning of the battle, is that these freshmen will be on the hunt. I mentioned the Mikhail and Chenzo thing with them winning as freshmen, but Cam Amin, who I think has been primed for a breakout and kind of got it last week against Joe Lee, I still think that he needs to prove himself a little bit more with wins over other proven guys in college. Joe Lee, Andrew Sparks, Keegan O'Toole, Garrett Ninehouse, these are all guys who will be looking for early upsets at the NCAA tournament, and if these guys can do something special in their conference championships, it should be good to watch. I mean, the guys have been going through different training circumstances this year. Look at Michigan, who was shut down for 2 weeks. Look at Iowa, who has currently been shut down for a little bit. And we see teams pulling out, like Davidson is already pulling out. This is the year to win it, and at 165, anything can happen. In my opinion, 165 is the toughest weight class in the entire NCAA this year. Now, let's get into a fun topic. So we talked about all those weight classes and everything going on there, but let's get into a very fun topic, which is let's rank the most electrifying conferences in college wrestling. So this is something that I see going around with these tier rankings, and I'll be honest, I don't love those in some regards, just because, like, when you tier rank a weight class or something like that, I just don't like to put guys down, in my opinion. I just don't. Like, I'm okay with saying, like, a Spencer Lee is a top-tier guy, or Gable Steveson based on those stats, but, like, I see other shows, other programs kind of tier rank guys. I don't like doing that. But conferences, I'm more okay with doing that. I think it's fun to say, like, this has been a super fun conference to watch this year. This conference, maybe not so much. So, what am I talking about? What am I talking about here? So, these are some of the conferences that we're going to be ranking, and we're ranking them on S, A, B, C, or F. And S is superior. This is essentially the best conference to watch this year. A is a great conference. B is a good conference to watch. C is an average. I enjoyed watching them, but haven't done a crazy amount for me. And then F is just bad. So let's get F out of the way right now. There's nobody at F. Like I just said, I'm not going to be throwing people under the bus, putting people down. That's not what I do. I like to look at things from a positive perspective, and there has been good from every single conference this year, in my opinion. So that's why there's nobody at F. But it's C at the average, and even that, like, average to watch, not average competition, like not average wrestlers. That's not what that means. Don't take that out of context. Just, I've enjoyed watching it, but there have been some mishaps. So, first of all, in the MAC, okay, Mizzou has been the dominant force, and they have been exciting to watch. And if you're a Mizzou fan, which there are a lot of Mizzou fans, then you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to put them at S or A. Okay, but looking overall at the rest, there hasn't been a lot of great competition for them outside of that, and just hasn't really given a lot of great matches or duels. Like, Mizzou has wins over Central Michigan, Iowa State, Northern Iowa, Arizona State, which have all been fun to watch, but outside of that, it's okay. The EIWA is similar. Navy and Army gave a good duel. It was fun to watch Navy grow this year with a new head coach, but the unfortunate part about the EIWA, which is why it's not as fun for me this year, is there are no Ivy Leagues. There's no Cornell. There's no Yanni or Vito or Max Dean or Ben Darmstadt to watch this year, and that's kind of unfortunate to me. And so that's why I kind of have it a little bit lower as the EIWA on my, excitement, electrifying to watch. The Pac-12, Arizona State has been fun to watch. They're another team that I put in that kind of C ranking. So Arizona State's been fun to watch with the Pac-12, beating or wrestling Oklahoma, Iowa State, Northern Iowa, rescheduling some of those. I think that's something that goes into the positives. But, and even Stanford, it's been fun to watch guys like Bass with Griffith, but unfortunately, no real Woods. And with Stanford dropping their program after this season, it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And so I have them at that C as well. Now, they're really good. The good conferences that have been just exciting for me, they're maybe not at that top echelon of thrills and excitement every single duel, but I still got a lot from that. And the first one is actually in the SoCon. So the SoCon has had a lot of exciting duels this year between their top three teams, between Campbell, Chattanooga, and App State. And you may be saying, well, not all those teams are ranked, and so it's not as fun, and maybe I get your sentiment there, but like Campbell's actually a top 25 team now. Arguably, App State, I believe, they were close to being a top 25 team at one point, but each of these duels has come down to like the last match. And when a duel comes down to the last match, to me, that makes it super fun to watch. When it's not, blowouts are fun to watch too sometimes. Like what I was doing in the Big Ten, it's fun to watch, but whenever you have these really close duels, and you even have close duels outside of that with Davidson and Citadel, maybe all their duels aren't that exciting to watch, but that's good for me to watch that. Unfortunately, kind of a sour taste at the end of the season with the SoCon, with Davidson now pulling out of the SoCon and NCAA championships. That's unfortunate, but so far the SoCon has been fun to watch this year for me. The other team that I put in this B in the good ranking is Big 12. Big 12's Okie State having their close duels with Iowa State, Northern Iowa, lots of young talent, fresh talent to watch with Ferrari, who's a trash talker in himself and makes things fun for the fans to watch. Master Giovanni, Plot, the return of Dayton Fix, the recent return of Dayton Fix has been fun. And outside of Okie State and the Big 12, you have Northern Colorado has been up and coming this year as a top 25 team. Iowa State has been exciting, but the faults for me here are you had a lot of guys kind of drop out, haven't been wrestling this season, dropping of the Fresno State program. Not that that leaves a sour taste in my mouth, but it's been good to watch. A great conference to watch this year. And there are two left. There's the Big Ten and there's the ACC. So where do I put each of these? Well, the Big Ten is always one of the most exciting conferences to watch. With Iowa and Penn State always going at it, Michigan and Ohio State really throwing in some things usually. This year, Iowa's been the dominant team, and to me, that's okay. They've been crushing it this year. It's still okay. Penn State, a lot of new, exciting guys, and able to pick up duels that they didn't have before, like against Michigan. That was a cool duel to pick up. And upsets galore always in the Big Ten. They have a lot of the number 1, number 2 guys, like Spencer Lee, Sammy Sasso, Gable Steveson, always thrilled to watch. And the big stories, outside of those teams, the top teams, you have Illinois, who was a team, has had a storied season with a big win over Ohio State. Purdue, Northwestern, and Wisconsin have kind of a winning triangle going on between those teams. The faults here, and this is why it's not at that S tier, why it's just at the great fun to watch. Rutgers, 0-4 right now. Haven't had a win. No Soriano returning. Kind of puts a damper on things. They canceled duels between Iowa and Michigan, and originally, Michigan and Penn State. Between Penn State and Iowa, it's put a damper on things. That's why it hasn't been great. Between all these programs kind of canceling, that's why I fault that as far as a fan, as far as fun to watch. So that leaves the ACC at S, the best. Why would I put ACC above Big Ten, you ask? Well, the dual meets, all of them have been super fun to watch, with Virginia pulling a big upset over Pitt. Virginia Tech, you just want to talk about that duel alone, arguably the best duel of the entire season, coming down to the last seconds, the remaining seconds on the clock between Latona and Camacho. And if you haven't seen it, the announcer during that duel was so funny to watch. He was just, I put him up there with like a Sheen Sparks, who I really enjoy listening to in the Big Ten, but the announcer during the ACC duel between Virginia Tech and NC State was a thrill. And NC State was riding one of the longest, actually the longest dual meet streak in college, and Virginia Tech was able to break that, beating UNC, who I didn't think they actually could beat, then beating NC State, who I thought there was not a chance they were going to beat, and had a close match and beat them. And then just individually, 165, that weight class between Jake Keating, Kennedy Monday, Mikhail Lewis, and Jake Wenzel, who just had a recent exciting match. At 197, Bonacorsi, Aiello, Trumbull, Caden Russell. Another exciting weight. And the ACC could realistically, I think another reason why it has been so exciting for me is, for the first time in many years, they can actually get 3 NCAA champs in a row from the ACC. At 49, it's possible with like an Austin O'Connor. 57 is definitely possible with a Hayden Hidley. And 65 with a couple of those guys I just mentioned as well. And then you could even get somebody else at 97. The ACC, to me, has just been one of the most fun conferences to watch this season. It's been one of the most electrifying. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with me on these tier rankings for the thrill and enjoyment of actually watching college wrestling? Now, there's been a lot going on in college wrestling. This was a massive show when it comes to all the weights. I talked about 25 heavyweight. I didn't even get to some of the other fun and exciting weights, like 133, which with the return of Dayton Fix is super fun to watch. 41 between Jaden Ironman, Seabass, Nick Lee up top is going to be tough weight class. And there is other tough talent there too, but this is one of my favorite shows of the year to do, because I get to dive into all the stats on each of the weights. But please let me know what you think is the actual toughest weight class this year, because there's some tough ones, and there's no arguing that. This is the Fanco Wrestling Show. My name's Josiah. Thanks for listening.